You are now listening to the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Welcome to the Radiance Films Podcast, a show dedicated to all things Radiance Films. I'm your host, Adam Lundy, here to talk about the latest announcements from Radiance Films as well as last month's releases. So let's get into it. So we're going to start off with the slate that was just announced last week. So just for context, I'm recording this on the morning of Tuesday, the 12th of May. So it's been just under a week since the announcements that are coming out for... want to say August? Yeah, for August. They came out last week. A little bit late recording this episode, just from a few other bits and bobs that I'll kind of talk about later on in this recording. So I'm going to start off going through the announcements, and this is what I would call a pretty classic Radiance Films slate. Because we have a world noir set, we have a Japanese film, we have an Italian film, we have an American film. Obviously, a bit more context for the American film shortly. But let's start off with the box set. So we have World Noir Volume 5. It's been a little bit of a while since we had a new World Noir release. Pretty standard Radiance release at this point. Seems to be one of their kind of bread and butter releases. Kind of similar to the Volume 4, which was centered around French films. This one is kind of centered around Italian films, it seems. And what Radiance are saying with this announcement is that it's kind of a combination of noir and Italian neorealism, which those are two of my favorite kind of movements, or I don't know if we call them subgenres, but certainly movements. So I'm really intrigued by this box set. It's really up my alley. So the three films that are included, the first one is called The Bandit, which, if I read the description here, returning from war, Ernesto comes home without a family to welcome him. A chance encounter with a gangster's ma, Lydia, catapults him to a life of crime. Redolent of American gangster pictures of the 30s and bathed in chiaroscuro lighting. Like many Italian genre films, Alberto Lattuada's The Bandit is a genre hybrid, a once noirish but infused with realism that brings to the fore the desperation of the post-war period. Which is newly restored. Radiance Films proud to present this seminal film on any digital format for the first time outside of Italy. And then the next film is Against the Law. So a middle-class man laundering money for the mob to make ends meet witnesses a murder during a currency exchange. Fingered as the murderer by police, he and his girlfriend attempt to clear his name. A Hitchcockian wrongman thriller in a crime framework, Pietro Germi's scenario echoes the American noir with a screenplay co-authored by the former head of Rome's flying squad. Against the Law was noted for its realism on release, where it was a hit with audiences and critics. Starring the charming Marcello Mastroianni in his first leading role, Flavio Calzavara's underseen gem is now restored in 4K and released for the first time in any format outside of Italy. And then finally, Four Ways Out, which is a gang of four ordinary men steal two cases stuffed with money from a football ground. They split up to evade capture, but misplaced allegiances and nerves threaten their freedom. A Hollywood-style noir by Pietro Germi. Four Ways Out, also known as The City Defends Itself, features the classic tropes of the genre, femme fatales, desperate men, and a cityscape that threatens to swallow up its characters. Awarded the Best Italian Film at the Venice Film Festival and newly restored in 4K, it is presented on home video for the first time outside of Italy. So those three just sound incredibly promising to me. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of film noir. I'm a huge fan of Italian neorealism. All three films sound right up my alley. So I'm super excited for this one. Out of all the releases for this month, this is the one I'm the most excited for. I'm typically really excited for World Noir box sets because they nearly always hit the mark. But this one in particular, I'm really, really looking forward to it. I cannot wait to get my hands on this set. It's going to be the first thing I watch when these ones come in August. On to the singular releases. So we have a film from Connie Chikawa, which is called 10 Women in Black, which, to read you the description of that, is a television executive's 9 mistresses conspire with his wife to have him killed. When Miwako, one of the mistresses, tells him of the plot, he decides to fake his own death in front of them all. The women panic and deny they were ever serious about the murder, while Miwako even takes her own life in remorse. But when they find out the man is still alive, they put their original plan back into action. Given complete creative freedom, Kon Ichikawa made this dark satire one of the undiscovered gems of Japan's cinematic golden age, featuring a stunning cast of Dai Studio divas and striking monochrome photography by Setsuo Kobayashi. This is a merciless dissection of social relations and gender roles in affluent post-war Japan. This one sounds incredibly interesting as well. It almost sounds like an expanded version of the Le Diabolique plotline, just obviously featuring more women. That's what it sounds like on paper anyway. Whether it stylistically matches up or not appears to be seen. I've never seen this film. In fact, I'm fairly blind to Kon Ichikawa in general. I recently watched his film Conflagration, which I thought was very good. So definitely looking forward to this film as well, just based on how much I liked Conflagration, I should say. This is another one that sounds really promising to me. And interestingly, it's another director that we can probably rule out for, the future Radical Japan box set that we know is coming probably at the end of the year. There was a few directors that we could have maybe guessed it would be, Kon Ichikawa being one of them. We can probably rule that out now that he has a singular release here. So that list is getting shorter and shorter, unless it's going to be a complete left field choice of maybe an underseen director from that period. So something to keep an eye on over the next few months when we eventually get word of that. Onto the other Italian film that's included. So this is a film called The Magnificent Cuckold, and it's by Antonio Pietrangeli, a filmmaker I don't think I'm familiar with. At least the name doesn't immediately jump out at me. To read you the synopsis from this one: a happily married businessman succumbs to the advances of one of his less square, more open-minded female friends. His eye is now open to the rampant adultery among his high society acquaintances. He is amazed at the ease in which they lie to their loved ones. Soon he begins to suspect his loving wife of infidelity, even as she guesses nothing of his own extramarital affair. Antonio Pietrangeli's luscious adaptation of Fernand Kromelik's tale of obsession and delusion skewers the changing mores and tenacious prejudices of 1960s Italian society with style. As a troubled husband's paranoia takes him even further away from reality, his fantasies come to life in sumptuous dream sequences, each one a dashing tribute to the radiant charm of Claudia Cardinale. This one sounds really cool as well. Again, a filmmaker I don't believe I'm familiar with. Usually, if Radiance has like a film already put out by this filmmaker, they'll mention that in the description, and they don't do that here. So I'm going to assume that I don't know anything, at least in Radiance, by this guy. Obviously, the stars Ugo Tognazzi and Claudia Cardinale are both featured in the Radiance back catalogue. Cardinale in particular is obviously a mega star from that era of Italian filmmaking. So this one sounds really, really promising as well. I think altogether, in terms of the new releases, this is a really, really strong month. One of the strongest ones in a long time, at least for me anyway. Carried fairly heavily by the World Noir set, but the other two new features also sound really promising as well. So on to the other announcement that is not technically new. We have a re-release of one of the very first Radiance releases, which is Dennis Hopper's The Hotspot, which is a film starring Don Johnson as this kind of drifter con man who ends up kind of inserting himself between these two women, a wife and a young kind of woman. And the plot kind of goes from there. So this is obviously a re-release from a Blu-ray that was one of the first Radiance releases back in the day, but this time it's in a full UHD. So it's a 4K world premiere of this release. I had thought that it was already released in 4K in Region A, but when I was doing some research, that doesn't appear to be the case. I'm not sure why I thought that, but it is a world 4K UHD premiere of this release. So I'm personally not going to rebuy it because, Blu-ray is usually good enough for me. I'm not one of these people who has to have everything in 4K. I'm not typically a double dipper unless a film is like an all-time favorite. I think the only time I've ever double dipped to get something in 4K would be like Blade Runner, 2001: A Space Odyssey, Mulholland Drive. I think those are the only films I've ever rebought in 4K, and there's only a handful of ones I can think of that I would ever do that with if the opportunity arose. So I'm not going to personally pick this one up because obviously I already own it. Like some people, if you obviously missed the original release first time around, then this is obviously a great way to get your collection back looking complete, because obviously it comes with the Scanavo case and everything like that. So if you missed the initial release of the Hotspot and want to have your early Radiance pickups looking uniform, I should say, then this will be an obvious buy, even if I'm not obviously going to pick it up myself because I just don't feel the need to double dip for the Hotspot. And then the last release, which is a non-Radiance one, it's partner label Chasm. They're releasing a film called The Last Circus. As I mentioned last time, there was a Chasm announcement. I'm not going to be picking this up. I'm not going to be getting into the Chasm stuff, even if like I said, the only kind of, I wouldn't even call it a partner because it's a sub-label. The only kind of non-Radiant stuff I'm going to be getting into on this podcast is the transmission stuff. So sorry if you're a fan of Chasm. I'm not going to be getting too deep into that stuff. So on that front, we're going to get into the most recent kind of slate of films. There's quite a few to get through because we had a couple of obviously singular releases. We had a box set and we had a transmission release that I initially wasn't going to get, but then I did end up picking up. So I'll go through that as well. Just before we get into the kind of nitty gritty of the April films, just want to give a quick announcement kind of extracurricularly to this podcast. I have actually started a new podcast, which is completely separate to this, not going to interfere with this in any way. It's called Histories of Cinema, and it's going to be a seasonal podcast. So every season we're going to tackle a new topic, which is essentially the cinematic history of a country or a movement. In this case, we're going to be starting, obviously, season 1. We're going to be covering the history of Japanese cinema. And I say we because I'm going to be joined by my good friend Chris Haskell, who, if you're a long-time listener to this podcast, has guested here a couple of times, so you'll be familiar with him. Episode 0, which is kind of an introductory episode, which is about 15 minutes long, is already up on streaming platforms. Episode 1, where we get into the era of silent cinema in Japan, is going to be up in the next kind of 2 weeks. Kind of taking today into account, I would anticipate the episode to be live within 2 weeks. So if you want to hear more from me and kind of look at non-Radiant stuff, more looking at history, kind of cinematic history, cultural history, societal history, and how they all intertwine, the Histories of Cinema might be the podcast for you. I'm going to put the link to everything in the description of this episode. We are also going to be running a free Substack that's kind of supplementary material, articles, thoughts, as we're kind of, almost like a diary as we're going through and watching films to cover each era. So if you're interested and you use Substack, please give us a subscribe over there as well. Like I said, it's completely free. We just want people to kind of engage and follow us along on the journey. So that's me plugging that. Like I said, if you're interested in Histories of Cinema, the links for everything will be in the description of this episode. For now, let's get into the April releases. So getting into the April releases, I'm going to start off with the transmission release, just because I initially didn't plan on picking this up, and then I just ended up doing it on a whim. So this was the film Highway to Hell, which, if I just kind of read you the description from Letterboxd as opposed to the lengthy one from the Radiance website. So this film was from 1991, and it is directed by a Dutch guy called Atta Dion. The synopsis from Letterboxd is: Charlie and Rachel run away from home to get married in Las Vegas, but they get attacked by a zombie who takes Rachel with him to hell, where she'll become one of Satan's brides. I actually, like, the reason why I didn't initially plan on picking this up is because it just didn't seem like my cup of tea. And to be honest, it still wasn't really my cup of tea, but it was much more enjoyable than I anticipated it being. It's very kooky, it's very quirky, almost like a grindhouse version of like the Tale of Orpheus, which I thought was a really interesting film to make. It's an interesting idea to kind of take that classic Greek myth and kind of make it very 90s, which this is very, very, very 90s, except for the score, which is kind of very much from maybe 5 or 10 years earlier, very 80s score, but visually is very 90s. The way that the thing that really jumped out at me, the one thing that I really liked with this film is just how creative it was with using not a lot from in terms of like a set design point of view, but still making it work. So pretty early in the film, the main character travels into hell and has to travel throughout hell to try and, you know, find his bride to be. But hell, like, it's not like CGI or sound stages or sets. It's literally just the Arizona desert. Just driving around Arizona and using different locations in creative ways without actually changing much about them. So, you know, towards like the back end of the film, the character travels through the river Styx, which is literally just like, you know, he's just traveling across a bed of water in a dam, which I guess is a real dam in Arizona. It doesn't try to make it look like a hell, which, you know, on one hand, that might not sit well with people, that there's maybe a lack of effort, but I actually really appreciated that the filmmakers were just using what they had and just making, and just not even trying to hide what they had, just kind of saying, this is it, this is hell, just deal with it. So I actually really liked that, not to call it like necessarily cheap or low budget or anything, but they just used the locations that they had access to very well, and didn't need to go overboard to try and recreate a vision of hell or anything like that. For what I assume was a pretty low budget film, I feel like if you tried to recreate hell on a low budget, it's just going to end up looking cheap. Whereas they didn't really have to worry about this because they didn't even really try in a good way. In a way, and it's a really weird out of left field comparison, but in a way, it's almost like the same way that Goddard approached making a sci-fi world in Alphaville, where it's basically just Paris, and then he just added a few things here and there, like in terms of props and stuff. And it's essentially the same idea in Highway to Hell. It's just the Arizona desert, and then there's a few props thrown in to kind of make you, you know, seem like you're in hell. So overall, if you're into kind of grindhouse, low budget, kind of kooky, quirky, horror adjacent, sci-fi adjacent kind of dark comedy films, I would really recommend this. It definitely is the cup of tea for some people. I'll probably never rewatch it. I think I've gotten everything I need out of it, but it was a fun time. I'm not mad that I ended up picking it up. Probably my least favorite transmission release so far, which obviously it's, you know, there's not a lot of them, but it was much more of a fun time than I anticipated with it. So Highway to Hell, if you're into kind of quirky, kooky, grindhousey stuff, then I would definitely recommend picking it up. Onto the Radiance releases. So I'm going to start off with just how they're ordered on the Radiance website. So the next one is Confessions of a Police Captain by Damiano Damiani, which obviously is a Radiance regular at this point, alongside its star. Well, one of its stars, Franco Nero, who obviously is a huge presence in the Radiance back catalogue. So again, I'll read the letterbox description rather than the long form one from the Radiance website, which is a police captain arranges the release of a criminally insane prisoner who soon winds up dead. When the district attorney takes on the case, he uncovers corruption in the department and vows to take down the man who's responsible. So the DA in this case is Franco Nero, and he's kind of put up against the titular police captain in Martin Balsam, of all people, which is a bit of a random guy to see show up in an Italian crime film, but in this era they were just picking up Americans and dubbing them over. So Martin Balsam is the police captain in this film, who kind of sets the events in motion, and it's kind of like a battle of wits style film where Franco Nero's DA is willing to do anything to get to the bottom of the case, while Martin Balsam's character initially comes across as the main villain. It becomes kind of quite obvious that there are, you know, other powers that be calling shots above him. So they're not always necessarily butting heads as kind of, you know, hero and villain. At some point that playing field kind of levels out, and the general corruption in, you know, the Italian government, police, judicial system, etc., becomes apparent to everyone. Like a lot of Italian kind of crime films of this era, it's incredibly cynical. So if you're hoping for, you know, for some like happy ending where everyone wins and comes out on top, you've probably never seen an Italian film from this era. It's an incredibly cynical film, which obviously just connects with what was going on at that time in Italy. In a way, it's a really good double feature with Illustrious Corpses, which came out earlier in the year. Now, I will say I think Illustrious Corpses is a far superior film to this. So if you're only going to ever watch one of them, then Illustrious Corpses would be what I would recommend. But if you're a Damiani fan, if you're wanting to kind of complete, you know, the Radiance releases for him, then you certainly are not making a bad move in picking up Confessions of a Police Captain. It is a really strong kind of neo-noir mystery thriller, corruption, conspiracy film to kind of give it all the subgenres. I didn't feel it was as tight as Illustrious Corpses, and visually wasn't all that much flair or anything like that. You know, it was fine. There was nothing necessarily technically wrong with it or anything like that. It just didn't grasp me in the same way that other Damiani films and other Italian films from this era have grasped me, when I think of like Illustrious Corpses and stuff like, you know, Slap the Monster on Page One, We Still Kill the Old Way, you know, other films like that Radiance have put out from this era that just grasped me a lot more. This one didn't particularly do that. I think I'm going to give it a rewatch at some point, just to maybe give it a second chance. But like I said, it's a perfectly good film. If you're into Italian crime and conspiracy films from this era, then it's certainly a must-have. But I wouldn't be recommending it to someone maybe going in blind to Damiani. If you've never seen a Damiani film and you think this might be the first one to pick up, I don't think I would recommend it to that person. I would say, you know, pick up A Man on His Knees instead, which I think is a stronger film by Damiani. So on to the next one, again, just going on the order of the Radiance website, we have Pedro Almodovar's Matador, which is a bit of an odd film. I didn't really know what to expect. I had only seen one Almodovar film many years ago, which was Tie Me Up and Tie Me Down. I don't really remember much about it, so I kind of went in a little bit blind. I obviously know that he likes to play around with sexual taboos and kind of bring in kind of noirish or giallo-esque kind of themes into his film. So I kind of somewhat knew what to expect, but I was still kind of going in slightly blind. One thing I didn't expect was for how quickly this sold out. Maybe it's because it was a 4K release. That's why kind of people jumped on it. I know it was a world premiere for this on 4K, so maybe that was a reason, but I didn't expect this to sell out as quick as it did. It is sold out on the Radiance website. There's possibly still some around from other retailers, but if you're hoping to get your hands on this, I hope you already did, because your chances of finding it now out in the wild are going to be slim unless you're willing to overpay. Now, unfortunately, I didn't love Matador. It's one of those films where Almodovar tries to do a lot. So it's kind of a giallo, it's kind of an erotic thriller, it's kind of a black comedy, but none of the pieces really fit together all that well for me. It's nearly 2 hours long, which I think was just too long for this kind of a film as well. You know, there's kind of two ways. Again, this is just my opinion. I'm not a filmmaker, so, you know, this may not have been possible. But, you know, if it was shorter, then it could have just been like a really fun romp. And if it was a bit longer, then maybe they could have spent more time kind of honing in on this kind of theme of sexual obsession. And it ends up just kind of being in a middle ground. It's a kind of a bit of both, and neither of which are very strong. Weirdly enough, the kind of the imagery of this and a lot of the kind of publicity around this film hones in on Antonio Banderas, because obviously he's a huge star, world star at this point. Obviously he was quite young making this, but nowadays he's just a world-renowned star. Everybody knows who Antonio Banderas is. And he plays a really weird role in this film where you think he's the main character, but then the other two characters that he's connected with, his matador tutor and his lawyer, they become at least far more interesting characters, in my opinion. To the point where, looking back, you could pretty much remove every scene with Antonio Banderas, and I think the film probably ends up more interesting because we're following the more interesting characters. So it's a bit of a weird one in that sense, where I think the selling point for a lot of people is it's young Antonio Banderas. Let's watch this because he's in it. At least that was it for me. I was like, cool, it'll be interesting to see young Antonio Banderas. And then to see his character get sidelined for a good chunk of the film while two other characters who have a far more interesting arc and dynamic kind of take over, was a bit of a left field choice, or just something, the way the film played out was really strange to me. So if you, I don't want to say I don't recommend it, but if you didn't, unless you're a big fan of Almodovar, I wouldn't really be stressing about trying to find this on second hand personally. I feel like it's definitely a film you should watch first before paying out your ear to buy it, on the second hand market. So maybe try and find it on streaming somewhere or something like that, because for me, it kind of starts writing a check that it can't really cash. I think the setup is really interesting. The character dynamics it sets up are really interesting, but it can't stick the landing. And if I recall correctly, I think Almodovar himself even called this the least favorite of his films. So you don't even have to take my opinion of it. Almodovar doesn't have a particularly high opinion of the film either, and he made it. So you don't really need to take my opinion at face value when the filmmaker himself is not a particular fan of this one either. So that's Matador. So on to the last kind of singular release of this month, and we have the Johnny To film Romancing in Thin Air. Now, I don't mean for this to be a really kind of downer podcast or anything like that, but unfortunately this is another one that really just didn't hit for me at all. Now maybe it's because I'm only familiar with Johnny To's action films, but I'm only familiar with Johnny To's action films. So when I saw that there was a kind of a romance film, not even a rom-com really, there's not much comedy involved. In fact, parts of the film are quite dark. But when I saw there was kind of a romance drama coming out from Johnny To, I was intrigued, because I'm not necessarily against romance dramas or anything like that. I've watched plenty of them with my wife over the years, and there's plenty of them that I like. So that really wasn't a major kind of issue for me. But one thing that just threw me is just how kind of one note and stagnant the film is technically. Obviously, when you what's the word? You connect Johnny To with kind of technical prowess, and kind of dynamic filmmaking. So I anticipated that this would be stylistically interesting, even if the plot was not going to be all that interesting. And unfortunately, neither are true. The plot is very kind of schmaltzy and kind of sentimental, and it also just doesn't look all that great. It's very one note. I even saw a review that called it like a Hallmark film, which unfortunately I think is pretty accurate. So yeah, this one was a bit of a miss for me. It's certainly one I don't plan on revisiting, to be honest. It ended up kind of being a bit of a slog because, like with Matador, I think it's far too long for what it is. Again, this is nearly 2 hours long, and I don't think it needs to be. I feel there's other films that do this better, so I wouldn't really waste my time with this one again. If I want to watch a film about kind of longing and loneliness, I would just watch the Before trilogy or In the Mood for Love, because they just do what this film wants to do far better. So yeah, unfortunately, Romancing in Thin Air was a miss for me this month. I was actually, and I don't say that, to gloat. I feel I'm actually disappointed in it, because like I said, Johnny To is this filmmaker known for his dynamic filmmaking. So I just thought there would be a little bit extra with this. There's like a couple of narrative curveballs towards the end of the film that did kind of stir me a little bit, but yeah, for the most part, it was just a bit of a slog to get through, unfortunately. And then finally, we have the kind of big release from this month, or last month, I should say, which is the Jacques Rozier box set Time to Play. So Jacques Rozier is a guy I was familiar with just because I'm familiar with the French New Wave, but I'd never seen any of his films, despite them all being on the Criterion channel. I just never thought to watch any of them, really. In fact, the only one from this box set that I'd ever heard of was Adieu Philippine. Obviously, this box set features all of his films. He didn't make very many. It's pretty much as comprehensive a set for Rozier as you can get. It kind of breaks down his entire career. So in a way, it's a really, well, I'm not going to say in a way, it is a really great box set from the perspective of that it is comprehensive. It includes all his feature films, it includes short films, includes interviews, supplementary material, and a really cool book that features Rozier himself kind of talking about all of his projects, including like unrealized ones, that, scripts that got written but never got made, or ideas he had that never got turned into scripts, etc. So the booklet in this one is really interesting from that perspective as well. Now, unfortunately, the films were mostly okay. So I'm just gonna go through it in the order of the box set, and I'll give you my thoughts on each of them. I'm not gonna do like a full breakdown on all of them, just because there's a lot of films to go through. But I'm just gonna give you kind of a brief overview of my thoughts on each one. So the first one is Adieu Philippine. This was one of my favorites of the set. It's very French New Wave at the start, so it starts off, very French New Wave, kind of typical early 60s French New Wave, kind of like Godard or Truffaut. Very freewheeling, young, good-looking people, just kind of living life in Paris. And then the second half of the film moves location to Corsica, and it weirdly becomes more Italian in the second half. Just in terms of how it's shot, it doesn't really have those quick cuts and kind of handheld camera movements that you associate with the French New Wave. It becomes much more of almost like a neorealist film in the second half, which I really enjoyed. In fact, I actually wish they moved to Corsica earlier in the film, because that's the main plot, really, is that this guy goes on kind of a last holiday with two of his friends to Corsica because he has military service in Algeria coming up. So the film kind of starts quite fun and freewheeling, and as time goes on and it gets closer and closer to him having to leave, it just gets more and more of this kind of melancholy and sadness starts to seep in. So it starts very French, ends very Italian. I really enjoyed it. It's kind of long. It's 110 minutes, which length is going to be a big theme with this box set. So it was a little bit long, but I did overly enjoy the tone and the style. Like I said, it's the only kind of main issue I have with it is that I do wish it moved to Corsica a lot earlier, because it's just so much more visually interesting than the Paris stuff that we see in pretty much every other French New Wave film. It does something a little bit different that I wish we got to see a little bit more of. The next film in the set is 10 years later. He made a film called Near Aurette, Don't make fun of me for not pronouncing the second part correctly, because that's a running joke in the film where nobody can really pronounce the name of that location. So this one, to give you the kind of the brief description from Letterboxd, a patient observation on the adventures of three young girls spending their 3-week summer vacation at a small village, a quotidian that includes cooking, excursions, playing cards, and going out with guys, enjoying life's simple pleasures. Patient is definitely the key phrase there. So this film is nearly 3 hours long, where basically nothing happens, which would throw a lot of people off on paper. But there is a quiet beauty in the meditativeness and kind of freedom in this film. It's just essentially about savoring those moments of tranquility and stillness. I don't know if this is a running joke that was meant, but for me it was almost kind of a running joke in this film, where they would say they're going to go do something. So let's go to a club, let's have a party, let's, do this, let's do that. And they'll say, yeah, let's go. And then we skip to afterwards. We never actually see them go to a club. We never see them have a party. We assume that it happened, but the action never takes us there, because Rozier is more interested in the quiet moments, the kind of moments in between the big events. So that's what this film is more so about. And that, again, will very much put some people off. Some people will maybe find it boring or uneventful, which would be completely understandable. But for me, I engaged with it quite well. I found it just really peaceful just to watch these girls just enjoy their holiday with their, the couple of guy friends that they pick up along the way. There's a few kind of romantic subplots to develop later on that are a little bit more serious, and things kind of end on maybe a melancholic note, kind of similar to Jew Philippine. But for the most part, this is a film just about enjoying kind of life's simple pleasures, taking in those moments of peace and tranquility. And this film also looks fantastic. It's in color. It's all shot on the French West Coast, kind of at the end of summer, start of autumn. So it's a really beautiful looking film, which is something that carries over into the next film as well. So Near Audouet, loved it, or not loved it. I liked it. Probably one of those films that I might be a bit slow to go watch again, just because of the length of it. But if you like kind of peaceful, slow films about the kind of poetry of the mundane, then this would be up your alley, especially because of how good looking it is. It is a really, really nice looking film. The next film on the set was from 1976, and this is called The Castaways of Turtle Island, which, again, to give you the plot synopsis from Letterboxd, Jean Arthur has been working as a clerk in a travel agency. One day, along with his colleague, comes up with a brilliant idea. What if I offer tourists real extreme recreation? So the group of tourists land on a deserted island with no food, no shelter, nothing. That description probably isn't the best, because the majority, well, I say the majority, 99% of the film is spent actually getting to this island, this kind of desert island that they're going to have this experience on. This, out of the first three films in the set, this is the one that's kind of most narratively structured and kind of classically comedic. It is essentially kind of like a farcical odyssey, and that kind of takes from starting off in the travel agency, where this guy is kind of sick of his mundane life and comes up with this idea to have this extreme excursion, and it just basically follows him and the tourists that he picks up on a journey to get to this mythical desert island that they've decided is going to be, where their holiday package is going to take place. In a weird way, it's almost like a modern farcical take of like Agira, the Wrath of God. It's just basically about a journey, as opposed to taking place in a destination. Despite being narratively structured, it is very freewheeling. There's a lot of stuff of just people talking and having kind of conversations, a lot of camera just coming in and out of characters doing different things along the journey. It is a really beautiful looking film. It is mainly filmed in the Caribbean, where this island is going to be. So really good looking film, especially the blues and the sunsets and stuff like that are just really, really great. So if you like kind of comedy odysseys that look really nice, and this would be up your alley. Again, like with all of the Jacques Rozier films, my main issue is the length. So this is 2 hours 25 minutes, which, you know, for a farce comedy, it's a bit long. Maybe that's kind of on purpose to kind of show, you know, that the journey they're taking is ridiculous. And so we need to drag it out to really punish the audience for being the stand-in for the tourists who decide to sign up to this extreme holiday. Maybe I'm grasping at straws there, but yeah, it's long. I do think it's a good film, and I do think it's worth the watch. It'd be one of my favorites from the set. The first three, I think, are all certainly well worth the watch. But I will go in with the caveat that it is long. So it wasn't a slog, luckily, to get through, but you do definitely feel the pace. But one thing I will say, it is kind of worth it in the end, because even though we're into the mid-70s, we're kind of out of the French New Wave. It does have a prototypical French New Wave gag at the end, gag ending, as I like to call them. Truffaut, especially, there was a lot where it kind of ends on a punchline. The Castaways of Turtle Island does something very similar. So the end, it is worth the journey to get to the ending, which is quite kind of darkly funny. Then the final two films of this set, I didn't unfortunately enjoy. So the first one is a film called Main Ocean Express, and this is from 1986, so it's 10 years later. And it's basically about a bunch of characters who meet on a train. They're all from very different walks of life and have very different backstories. And it's about how their stories kind of converge once they arrive at their destination. And unfortunately, I just found it really tedious to get through. I don't mind hangout films where people are just hanging out, not doing much, but I didn't find any of the characters particularly interesting, so hanging out with them wasn't very fun for me, unfortunately. So this one was a bit of a miss for me, unfortunately. It also didn't benefit from, you know, the really beautiful cinematography of the first three Rozier films from this set. So yeah, this one wasn't for me, unfortunately. I didn't particularly enjoy it. Looking at the Letterboxd ratings, there is a lot of people who do enjoy it, so, you know, I very much could be the bad guy here. One of those ones where if you like hangout movies, you might like it, but again, I like hangout movies generally, and I didn't like it. The last film in the set then is from 2001, and it's called Fifi Martingale. And this one's very stylistically different to all of the other ones. This is definitely the most kind of deliberately plotted and scripted in the entire box set, because instead of kind of, you know, hazy days in the sun and improvisation, we essentially get a long form play. So it's very kind of like Jacques Rozier light in a way, where it's a very plot heavy or dialogue heavy script, a lot of exact moments. So there's basically, it's very different from everything else in the box set stylistically, is all I'll say. Now, unfortunately, I did find the finished article quite drab. I didn't really get much out of it, except from a couple of smirks here and there. I didn't really see what the point of the film was. You know, a lot of the time I can really, you know, see what the overall message is, and I couldn't really get what the message was with Fifi Martingale. Ultimately, it did just come off like Rivette light, or like almost a bad imitation of a Jacques Rivette film. So another one that unfortunately I can't really recommend to most people. One thing I'll say with this kind of set as a whole, like I said, that the set is incredibly comprehensive. So if you're interested in learning about Jacques Rozier's career and seeing his body of work, then it's a must buy from that perspective. Going in with the trepidation that personally I didn't enjoy everything that was in the set, and I can't imagine revisiting most of the films in the set anytime soon. One thing I would maybe recommend for people, because the films were very different from what I expected them to be. So if you don't want to blind buy a set like this, because it's pricey enough, we're talking about £60 or so, it's a bit of a financial investment. So if you don't want to go in blind, if you have access to the Criterion channel, everything that's in this box set is streaming in the Criterion channel, so maybe give one or two of the films a watch there rather than going in completely blind like I did. Because if I wasn't a completionist and I watched a couple of these films in the channel, I probably wouldn't have picked up the set. That's not to say the quality of the set isn't great. The quality of the set is fantastic. We're talking purely about how comprehensive it is, what's included, etc. The set is fantastic. But the films themselves, I didn't particularly love any of them. I liked some of them well enough to maybe own them on their own, but yeah, I would say maybe don't go in too blind to these, because they're quite different from what you might expect from a new wave filmmaker. And that is that. So those are all the April releases, and obviously we talked about the recent announcements as well. I will just reiterate that my new podcast, Histories of Cinema, has launched with episode 0, available everywhere on streaming, as well as our Substack being live as well. So if you want to check that out, I would really, really appreciate it. It's not going to interfere with the Radiance podcast at all. So if you could check that out, I would be much appreciated. Any feedback you have, feel free to hit me up on Blue Sky, on Instagram, or if you want to join the Substack, as I said, it's completely free to do that as well. In terms of when I'll be back next, there's no Vault episodes planned for the next little while, so I'll be back around this time next month when the next announcements drop. Until then, I'll catch you online, and take care.
Thank you for listening. To hear more shows from the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network, please select the link in the description.
Greetings, welcome to Two in the Pinku Podcast. Experience a deep dive into softcore Japanese sexploitation cinema from the 60s up into the present, with an emphasis on sleaze and seduction. We are monthly or bi-weekly, and we're not even bi.
Will pink film save our marriage? Find out on Two in the Pinku Podcast.
Hey, this is Jason Kleberg from the Force 5 Podcast, a show that forces a guest to come up with a movie-themed top 5 list topic, and then we reveal our picks on air. Top 5 heist films, top 5 tearjerkers, top 5 movie dogs. Every show you'll be asking yourself, what would be on my list? Guests include directors, screenwriters, actors, podcasters, musicians, authors, and even a professional wrestler. Subscribe to the Force 5 Podcast, and you won't just be a listener, you'll be a list nerd. The Force 5 Podcast, available wherever you're listening now.
Hello and welcome to Tumbleweeds and TV Cowboys. My name is Hunter. In this podcast, I'll be joined by a different guest each week to discuss a classic Western movie or TV show. I've been a fan of classic Westerns for as long as I can remember, and in recent years, they've become very nostalgic for me. I love the aesthetic, the tropes, and I love seeing different filmmakers' takes on them. At their best, they're incredibly entertaining, rewatchable, and some of my all-time favorite movies are Westerns. We'll mostly focus on Western movies made in Hollywood, but we'll also be covering spaghetti Westerns, and one thing I'm very excited to get into are Western TV shows. I've got some amazing guests coming on the show, film professors, historians, and podcasters, and Tumbleweeds and TV Cowboys is part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network, and many guests on the show will be from other shows on the network. Thanks for listening.
Have you ever wanted to dive deeper into the horror movies you love? Beyond the Blood is a horror podcast for fans who want more than just surface-level screams. We do deep dives into the movies that shaped us, digging into director commentaries, behind-the-scenes stories, deleted scenes, and the special features that most people skip. Each episode is a love letter to the genre. We break down how these films were made, the creative risks that paid off or didn't, and the lasting impact they've had on the genre as a whole. From 70s slashers to modern nightmares, we celebrate the craft, chaos, and characters that keep us coming back. If you're the kind of fan who rewatches movies with the commentary on, or you simply grew up in the video store horror aisle, the Beyond the Blood podcast was made for you. New episodes every single week. Subscribe, let's dig deep. Welcome to the Beyond the Blood podcast.
Whoa! Okay. I'm ready. Welcome to Split Your Head, a bi-weekly podcast hosted by me, Bob, that covers the gamut of all things horror, exploitation, cult, underground, experimental, transgressive, bizarre, and indie. I've been fortunate enough to connect with some of the most groundbreaking and upcoming filmmakers, writers, and artists. Don't expect a typical interview. I love shooting the shit with my guests and stumbling on surprising topics that'll literally split our heads. From splatter comedies to nihilistic sleaze, uncomfortable art house to genre classics. If it gets my brain buzzing and cracking wide open like a watermelon full of blood, then I would like to share it with your ears. Now a part of the Someone's Favorite Productions Podcast Network. Hi, Mom.